What's going on, everyone? Austin here. Ferrari Hats On, Drive to Survive is in the background, which means that we're going to be talking about F1. And today we're going to talk about the 6 sprint races that were confirmed for the 2023 season. Now, these sprint races are spread all throughout the season. There were 4 in the 2022 season, but in 2023, there's going to be these 6 starting in April with Azerbaijan, June in Austria, July in Belgium, October in Qatar, October 22nd in USA, more specifically the Circuit of the Americas in Texas, and then November 5th, which is Brazil. That'll be such a fun sprint race. Ever since these sprint races were introduced, they've been a little controversial, and I just mean controversial in the way that every F1 decision put forward has the lovers and the haters of it, the people that are ecstatic about the change, or the people who think that the system is better the way that it is and don't want it changed. So today we're going to look at some pros and cons of F1 sprint races to see whether or not F1 sprint races are good for the sport of Formula One. Before I get into my reasons of why I like it and why I don't, I want to hear what you all are thinking. Let me know in the comments if you like the addition of sprint races, if you think there should be more or less. But without further ado, let's get into it. So here's my little pros and cons list, and I know it might look basic, but I was scouring the internet trying to figure out, who likes the sprint races, who doesn't like the sprint races, and what are the reasons. And really the reasons are all pretty much the same. So let's start with the pros. Look, you have more racing. Fans, they want to see the racing. The practices are interesting. Sure, you're getting a feel for it, but that's more for the drivers. What the fans like is the qualifying, very exciting, and then the racing. So simply put, more racing, more exciting action on track, more overtakes, more drama. That's what you want. That's what fans want, and that's why more racing is 100% a plus. Now, looking at it on the driver's side, the second plus is that it gives drivers the opportunity to make up for bad qualifying. We all know drivers aren't at the top of their game 100% of the time. So let's say a driver has a terrible qualifying. Boom, you have a sprint race to make it up, especially if you have a good car. Also think of it as, let's say, a car retires mid-qualifying for someone who's supposed to make it into Q1, but they don't. This system allows those drivers to make up for it and get back to where they would be, hopefully, if they had a successful qualifying. So it benefits drivers in that way too. And then kind of the last major pro around this was I was able to see that there are more points available for drivers. So here's the 2022 F1 point system, and I haven't heard anything about the 2023 point system changing at all. So you have first place 8 points, second place 7, third 6, fourth 5, fifth 4, and so on and so forth, all the way up until 8th place where they only get 1 point. So this gives drivers who've had a great qualifying and then a great sprint race, the opportunity to just gain more points and really build that gap, compared to their opponents who maybe didn't have such a great day for qualifying or the sprint race. Now, this could also be great for midfield cars, is if they do have a great qualifying and are able to stay ahead during the sprint races, then boom, they get that many more points, which, look at Alfa Romeo, who came in 6th last season in 2022. They only had 65 points, so any of these point amounts really can make a huge difference to them. So those are kind of the main positives that I saw. Again, if you can think of any others, please drop it down in the comments. I would love to know. But let's move on to the negatives. Bad for midfield cars. And here's what I mean by that. Let's say you're a midfield car, you had a phenomenal qualifying, and then you had a really good sprint race. Think about Magnussen, who, was able to qualify on pole in 2022. When it came to the sprint race, he dropped down in positions. Haas's whole strategy for the sprint race was to minimize the damage because they knew the damage was coming, because sprint races really do benefit those fast top of the pack cars, the Ferraris, the Red Bulls, and the Mercedes, because no matter what, those cars are going to make up points. They could have we saw this in 2021. Lewis Hamilton, something happened with the car, qualified, got out in Q3, was able to make up most of it, all because they had the sprint race and he had those 20 or so laps to make up that ground, which the top cars are always going to do. So for midfield cars, it's kind of saying Doesn't matter how great your qualifying was, doesn't matter how great you drove. Sorry, you're going to get pushed back anyway due to the sprint race, and then further back even in the race itself. And then I hear people saying that if you're going to do sprint races, you should also have reverse grids where they just invert the order of qualifying to, if you qualified first, you're starting last. I think that's the stupidest thing in the world. So just no. So by far, I think the biggest negative is that cars that are just average aren't going to compare. They're not going to fare well. And 99% of the time, a sprint race is not going to be favorable to you if you're a midfield or obviously back of the field car. Now, a second negative is that I say controversial point system only because people aren't decided on whether or not you should receive points for a sprint race. It's not the actual race, and it's not really anything but another form of qualifying in the sense that you're still just trying to figure out your position for the actual race that happens on that Sunday. So do you really need more points? You know, we don't want point totals in the future of F1 to be just in the thousands because that just seems unnecessary. So adding points for something that's not the race, you know, people are really split on that, and should teams even be awarded points for the sprint races, especially since there are more and more sprint races being added to F1, that's up in the air. Personally, this, in the positive category, the number one is what I want as a fan. You know, I am for sprint races because it's more racing. I mean, that's why I watch F1. I watch the practices, I watch the qualifying, but I'm in it for the racing and all the action that happens there. So personally, I'm a huge, huge fan of sprint races, and I hope that they continue to add more. Obviously, every race weekend, you know, doesn't need a sprint race, but I think it really suits certain tracks super, super well, such as Brazil, which we'll see, you know, in 2023. Again, let me know what you guys think of sprint races. Good, bad, the ugly, the pretty. Just, I want to know your thoughts, and maybe you'll convince me that sprint races are bad. But appreciate you watching. Catch you next video.